Hola Houston, and welcome to Viva Magazine Live. I'm your host Blanca Blanco, and tonight we're having a critical conversation about domestic violence, abuse against women, and femicide right here in Houston. This is an issue that affects thousands of families across all communities and often in silence. Behind every statistic is a real story, a real person, and a life that matters. Joining us tonight is a leader on the front lines of this fight. Sonia Corrales is the Deputy CEO of the Houston Area Women's Center, one of the largest organizations in the country supporting survivors of domestic and sexual violence. But first, before we hear from Sonia Corrales, we're going to take a quick break to hear from our general sponsor, Commissioner Adrian Garcia. Don't go away. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Viva Magazine Live, and we're here with Deputy CEO of Houston Area Women's Center, Sonia Corrales. Sonia, thank you very much for being here today.
Thank you, Blanca, for having me.
Sure. Let's start with the big picture, Sonia. How would you describe the current state of domestic violence in Houston?
Well, I will tell you, Blanca, that domestic violence, domestic abuse, intimate partner violence, as we all refer to it, continues to be a public safety problem and a public health problem here in Harris County and in Houston.
Right.
We know that it impacts not only that survivor and their family, but also entire communities, and it is both predictable and it's preventable.
Yes, yes. Well, what are the most common forms of abuse your organization is seeing today?
Well, one of the things that we always talk about is that domestic violence or domestic abuse is rooted in power and control.
Yeah.
Right? So the power and control is really the root of it. And that often takes many forms. And so it could be physical abuse, it could be emotional abuse, sexual abuse, financial abuse, religious abuse, and those are all things that we see at the Houston Area Women's Center daily, either through our phone calls or when we see people individually.
Yes, so when people think, or let me put it this way, many people think only that domestic violence is physical abuse, and you just went through all of that. And so can you explain in a little more detail, like the emotional and emotional or psychological and financial abuse, like that? Those are kind of vague. I mean,
Yeah.
How does that show up in the abuse form?
Yeah. What a great question.
Thank
I
you.
think that's one of the questions that I think oftentimes people don't really recognize.
Yes.
when you talk about emotional abuse, because you're right? People think that domestic abuse or domestic violence is only physical, and so oftentimes that keeps people from speaking up because they could be going through emotional abuse. So emotional abuse means that somebody is belittling you, humiliating you, calling you names, and it could be a little push, shove here and there, but also is isolating you from your friends and family. You get to the point where you have to ask permission to go somewhere, or you don't wear the clothes that you used to wear anymore. So it's another form of control, but it keeps you in a situation and you keep getting humiliated. And oftentimes people don't recognize it because it begins as something subtle and then it gets worse over time.
Kind of subtle and you don't notice it.
Right.
And of course it becomes I guess women just become resentful of it. Right?
Absolutely. I mean, I think, it's also very harmful, right? So when somebody is somebody that you're supposed to love, somebody that is your partner, is constantly calling you names or saying that you're not good enough for this or good enough for that, or that how can you go to work, and and so they're putting you down all of the time. And so that does tie into the second part of your question about financial abuse, because oftentimes too, that's why I think these are really excellent questions, is people don't think about what financial abuse is, or that even financial abuse is domestic violence.
That is something I wouldn't even have thought about that. How does that show up?
Well, that shows up in various ways. One of them is that somebody, because it's rooted in power and control, somebody's controlling all of the money that goes into the household, whether you go out to work, as a survivor or not. And even if you don't, say you stay at home and you're with the children and you're taking care of the home and your partner goes to work, you may not ever know how much, money is coming into the house because that's something that they keep from you. Or say you go to work, but then you have to turn over all of your money, to that person.
Right.
Or you get no money, no money at all. Or they open credit cards in your name and then they run the credit cards and then you get back credit. That's financial abuse. Somebody who is not allowed to go to work because you can't, you're not allowed. You don't have permission to go to work, and so therefore you're not able to make money. Somebody who's not able to go to school. Like you want to further your education and you're not allowed to do it, and that prevents you from ultimately, making the money that you need and becoming financially independent.
Right, right. So, what are some of the warning signs that loved ones or even coworkers should look for in a person or somebody that, is kind of demonstrating some sort of abuse?
Yep.
I mean, or what do people look for in that?
Yeah, I think that's another great question, because one of the things that we talk about is that domestic violence or domestic abuse is everywhere, right?
Yeah.
And you mentioned the workplace, or you mentioned a loved one. So it doesn't matter who you are. That's part of the public health problem, is that if you work with somebody, if you're friends with somebody, or you know of somebody, or it's a friend or a family.
Right.
I mean, the domestic violence impacts us all because it's so prevalent, in our community. Right. So if you notice that somebody is, maybe they have a change in appearance, or you see unexplained bruises, you may say, oh, what happened, to your arm?
Yes.
Or you may begin to see some of those things. They could be suffering, abuse. Somebody who at work maybe is showing up late. Right. Or now is constantly absent, or they're being they're on the phone all the time at work because they're being harassed, and they're calling, the partner is calling them, and that is the abusive partner. Those kinds of things. Somebody who all of a sudden can't leave, or you notice that maybe your friend all of a sudden has to ask permission to even go with you to the store to go shopping. Those are the kinds of things where you can see where somebody is getting controlled. Or if you're a family and all of a sudden not all of a sudden necessarily, because it happens over time.
Gradually.
But somebody who is being isolated, they're no longer coming over, they don't come to family gatherings, as much as they used to. Those are all signs that somebody could be going through domestic violence, and batterers or abusers will use different tactics, to be able to maintain that power and control.
And one of the most common questions, Sonia, I'm sure people ask is, why don't the victims just leave? I mean, they're free, right?
Yeah. So I think another good question. You have all the great questions. I think one of the things that I always like to say about that is that, again, domestic violence is rooted in power and control. So you have one partner maintaining that power and control through all of these tactics that end up in all these forms of abuse. And so for us, the way that we frame that is, what are really the barriers that prevent somebody from leaving?
That was going to be my next question. What are the barriers? Yes.
Yeah. So framing it like the barriers, what is preventing them from leaving? And of course, it's that power and control. Fear, that somehow they're going to get killed because a batter will threaten that they're going to hurt them. Loss of children. So a lot of times, especially in Latino and Hispanic communities, moms are with their children all the time. And that's one of the things that we see with Latinas, is that they don't leave their children. Right. And so if you have somebody who is constantly threatening you that they're going to take the children if you leave, that's another barrier of somebody not being able to leave. Finances. Somebody who has not worked and all the things that we just talked about is happening in their home, they can say things like, well, where am I supposed to work? Right. How am I going to pay the rent? Or how am I going to pay the mortgage? Because this person is the one who brings in the money. So those are all barriers that of somebody who is potentially trying to leave. But financial abuse is one of the things that that batterer uses to be able to keep somebody in the home. And oftentimes what we see is that they're going back because they don't believe that they can make it financially, right? So that's one of our major programs. And one of the major things that we talk about is that what kind of programming can we offer survivors so that they can be financially free?
Right. Thank you for that. Yes, very, very critical. So now I want to turn our attention to something difficult, but very important, Sonia. The reason why we're having this conversation is because of a new feature film that's airing in Mexico now and will be released in the United States very soon. The film is based on the corrido de Rosita Alvarez, sung and made popular by the famous mariachi singer Antonio Aguilar. The story is about a beautiful college student who supports her family by selling flowers, but her looks attracts unwanted attention. Between her jealous boyfriend and a persistent customer advances, her life takes a dark turn. The film was produced in Saltillo, Mexico by director Gabriel Gabo Ramos in collaboration with Epic Films and Universidad de Carolina, Saltillo, Mexico. It has won many film festival awards in the United States, including the Houston Film Festival. So now, we bring Sonia to talk about this powerful movie. Sonia, tell us why, because you were there. Tell us why this movie is so important for us to watch.
Yeah, first of all, I was very glad to be there, and thanks to Daniel Saenz, who invited me, and I was just very honored to have been invited to that. And just being able to see the film, this film is fantastic. It's fantastic because this director really takes all of the pieces of domestic violence, violence against women, and then ultimately femicide, because femicide is something, that happens globally.
Yes.
It's not just a Mexican problem, it's not a US problem, it's a global issue of this happening to women. But one of the reasons that I like this film is because he uses this, this storytelling way of talking about a very important issue, and a very important issue that really deals with its root. So he's talking about gender roles.
Right.
He's talking about, how this young girl gets treated, even in the classroom, when boys are not allowing her to speak.
Right.
Or, but he goes into the jealousy, he goes into dynamics of domestic violence, he goes into this other guy, who is pursuing her and who's not respectful. So it really is a great opportunity to talk about all those things, not only about just dynamics of violence, but also getting to the root of it. Yes.
So Sonia, just to get back, for viewers who may not know the term, how do you define femicide?
Well, femicide is a term that often is used in Mexico, and it's often used in Spain as well. And femicide, it is the murder of women because you're a woman.
Yes.
And so oftentimes it is tied to sexual violence, it's tied to domestic abuse, it's tied to stalking, it's tied to all of those things, and it's again rooted in power and control. But it also goes a little bit further and also shows that the person who is killing this woman is due to ownership of her.
Right, like she's an object.
Yes, like she's an object.
Yeah. So are we seeing an increase in these cases in Houston or across Texas?
Well, you know what, that's an interesting question, because overall in Texas, we've seen homicides or murders related to domestic violence decline.
Yeah.
But in Harris County, between 2023 and 24, we saw an increase in domestic violence related homicides and femicides.
What do you attribute that with?
Well, one of the things that we always like to talk about is, what form or how did this happen, right? What weapon did they use? And oftentimes it's a firearm or it's strangulation. And still in Texas, we lead deaths through firearms. So that's the most likely that is used. And so one of the things that we always talk about is that the more access that you have to firearms, the more at risk you are for getting killed, in your home. So whenever there's domestic violence or domestic abuse, if there's a firearm in the home, you have a 500% chance of getting killed. Wow. And that to me is it's a statistic that we really should let sink in and really think about, because that leads to, that person killing themselves and then ultimately killing the family, which are domestic violence related homicides.
Right, right. What are the warning signs or red flags that a situation could turn violent?
Well, we talked about earlier about the friends and family, right?
Yes.
Some of the things that we can see. But if you are in a relationship that you think, might be abusive, one of the things to look for is that if your partner is very jealous, in this movie, that's one of the things that they talk about quite a bit is the jealousy. So if your husband is, or your partner or your boyfriend, whoever that might be, is a very jealous person, oftentimes, or sometimes people think that it's a sign of love. Oh, he's jealous and he loves me and that kind of thing, including teenagers, because we know that this happens among teens as well.
Yeah.
So that could be a sign that somebody is not in a healthy situation. And we always frame it around, what does healthy look like?
Right.
The other one is that if this person begins to, belittle you, or you start feeling as though, wait a minute, something is not right.
Right.
Or all of a sudden you feel a little bit more controlled, that, he says things like, well, why are you going with your friends? Or why are you doing this? And why are you doing that? You only need me. So it's that control, it's that sort of like that isolation only for me.
Right.
One of the other things that we talk about that oftentimes people don't relate is the abuse of animals. So if somebody is very abusive to animals, so if you have a cat or if you have a dog and that person is abusive or uses, the pet as a way to control you, or say, I'm gonna kill your cat if you don't do this.
Yeah.
That's another sign, that.
I never thought about that,
Yes,
but yeah.
that is it's a big correlation there. The other thing is the finances. If all of a sudden you don't work anymore because your partner tells you that he doesn't want you to work, he wants you to stay home and take care of the children, and you don't really want to do that. You want your career and you want to go back to work, but then there's that control.
Right.
So those are some of the warning signs, that we talk about. Now, if you're in a situation where it becomes a violent situation, one of the first things that we do is call 911, because you could potentially die. And we talk about also risk factors that we talk to a lot of survivors about, and we can talk about that as well.
Right. How critical is early intervention? I mean, if you see it, we need to stop it. Like how critical in preventing these tragedies?
Yeah.
I mean, so when do you intervene?
Another great question. So one of the things that we always talk about too is that, at the very beginning of the conversation, I said, this is something that is predictable, and this is something that is preventable. Because remember, it's a cycle, it's a cycle of violence. So we know that when somebody is in a situation that could potentially lead to its more lethal form, obviously domestic violence, and then somebody getting killed, is that we know that there was possible intervention opportunities, right, for your friend or for your family member. And so we want to always think about those things. But in terms of prevention, we know that this is also a crime that is preventable.
Right.
And we think about it in terms of, because it's a public health problem, this impacts anybody. And in the film, he gets to the root. So he gets to the root of how women get treated in our society, and then violence gets normalized, right?
Yeah.
It becomes a normal thing.
Yeah.
And so one of the things that we always want to talk about is that, what do we do to prevent it from happening in the first place, right? Let's start there.
Right.
And so dealing with children, socio-emotional learning, so talking about healthy relationships, talking about boundaries, talking about how do we set those protective factors. So being able to have a child and teach them boundaries for both boys and girls, because ultimately what we want to prevent is somebody who is an abuser and somebody who can potentially become a victim or a survivor.
Right.
And so teaching those those boundaries, those healthy relationships, conflict resolution, all of those things, and that because you're a girl, you don't have to behave this way, or because you're a boy, you don't have to behave, this way.
Right.
And that's what we call primary prevention, stopping it before it happens. But we know that it's very prevalent.
Yes.
So part of the prevention strategies too is having organizations like the Houston Area Women's Center.
Yes. Okay.
Organizations that are going to be able to provide not only support. So anytime that we provide support, whether it's shelter, whether it's counseling, whether it's economic empowerment support or legal advocacy, that's prevention, because we are providing some help to somebody that could prevent future violence from happening. Right. And that's very important for children as well. So counseling, being able to provide counseling for the adults and for the children, but being able to have services. So that includes funding. That includes making sure that organizations like the Houston Area Women's Center have enough funding to be able to provide that support. That's also prevention. The fact that Harris County or the fact that the city of Houston invests money in addressing domestic violence, that's prevention in and of itself. And then long-term prevention is being able to get help for the people who are being abusive. Because we want to also be able to help people who are the abusers so that they stop. And then long-term support, for survivors is also part of that. Prevention is that once you get somebody out of the situation and then you're providing all of these wraparound services, that they're financially sustainable and that they're emotionally well. And so that is that.
And I was going to ask you too, when you talk about counseling, Sonia, do you talk about, it is not just counseling for her, but it's counseling for the entire family, correct?
Yes, so it's counseling for the person who is being abused and then for the children who are there. If there is somebody who is an abuser, somebody who is engaging in abusive behavior, we do refer them. There's another organization that we work with called Aid to Victims of Domestic Abuse, and they actually provide, that support to that individual. Now, if you have a family member, for example, or a friend, we always frame it in terms of the 3 R's. And you talked about, being able to respond, but being able to recognize, so learn about domestic violence. And today, people can learn about it, or you can go to our website and learn about it. And just being able to learn about it so that you could recognize some of those signs, but being able to respond to somebody in a non-judgmental way and say, hey, listen, this is not your fault. I want you to be free from the effects of violence and you do not deserve this, and then refer them to, to an agency.
Let's now move on to support. And you mentioned some of the services that Houston Area Women's Center provides. Are there any other services that are new that you provide? I know every piece of it is very, very critical. But what can people, let's say for instance, a woman needs your help and support right away, and you have shelters, correct? So do they actually move? You have a shelter where they move in and you support them for the time being until they get up on their feet? How does that look? What does that look like for somebody?
I love that question too, because one of the things that we know about survivors of violence is that they will spend a lot of time really contemplating whether they're going to leave or what they can do. And so they contemplate for a really long time, and oftentimes it's because they don't know what's available or what it looks like. And so I like talking about the Houston Area Women's Center, and in 2025 we opened up our new place called One Safe Place Houston. And so One Safe Place Houston, and it's a different way of providing emergency housing, or AKA shelter. And that is, historically in domestic violence shelters, women shared or people shared. And so they shared a space, you can have 2 moms in one room with their children. Well, now these are almost like an apartment style units where a survivor, man or a woman, can come in with their children and be able to have their own apartment. And so there we're able to provide all the services. We provide food, we provide transportation and access to all the services in one place.
For how long do you shelter them? Is there a time limit there?
So there is no time limit as far as how long they can stay. They can stay as long as they need. I think on average, people are probably staying about maybe 65 to like 91 days, because we have both emergency and then we have transitional housing.
So if somebody's in immediate danger, what should they do first, Sonia?
Well, if it's immediate danger where somebody is, being physically abused in that moment, or they're scared, the first thing that we say is call 911. And so, of course, we have a 24-hour hotline, but it's not an emergency police line. It is an emergency that if somebody is interested in learning more about domestic violence or about their situation, if they want to go to like an emergency housing situation or just trying to leave, and they want to know more information, they can call our hotline and we can provide that help. Now, I also say that if it's not an emergency and you really want to talk, you can call our helpline too. And so I think that that's important, because oftentimes people think, well, it's a crisis line and I don't have a crisis right now. I just think that I might be in a situation. You can call anyway and to learn more about it.
And just to talk it out and, and have your, concerns heard. I think that's really important. So for someone not ready to leave yet, they're thinking about it, just like you mentioned. What safety planning options are available for somebody that is kind of on the fence? They're not sure that they should leave yet, but is there any kind of safety planning that they can do or that's available?
Yes. So when there's two ways to do that. One, if you call our hotline, we have a 24-hour hotline helpline where somebody can call.
What is that number, Sonia? We'll put it on the screen.
It is 713-528-2121, and we speak immediately English and Spanish, and then we will connect anybody to any other language that we have available through our language line.
Okay.
But if somebody is calling us and they really are just wanting information and may not be ready to leave, we do a couple of things. We have counselors, on the line who answer the line, and we do safety planning, but we also do a lethality assessment.
Yeah.
And the lethality assessment asks a series of questions about some of the things that they might be experiencing that really tells them how at risk are you to potentially getting killed. And then the second thing that we do is safety plan immediately.
Right.
So we have a personalized safety plan that we do with them about, do they go to work? Are they ready to leave? And if they are not ready to leave, what are some of the things that they can do to plan, when they want to leave?
Right.
Because the most dangerous time is when somebody is trying to leave, or has already left. So it's important to talk about those things. But if they go to our website, so if you're a friend or family.
Let's give the website out so we can put it on the screen.
Sure. It's www.hawc.org.
Okay.
And you can go to our website, and there is a safety planning button that you can use. There's also a chat, so if you don't want to call, you can use the chat to talk to somebody via chat. And so that safety plan is there so that they can look at it, and they can use it for either yourself or a family member or a friend. But we also use it to help safety plan with somebody.
So what are the misconceptions or stigma still that prevent people from seeking help? Name a couple of those.
So one of the things that we hear the most is that it was my fault and that nobody's going to believe me. So because they're being told that somehow you're not going to be believed, because people know me in the community and they know that I'm this person, this person, this person, and they don't necessarily see what is happening in the home. So that survivor will believe it and say, well, nobody is going to believe me.
Right.
And so you don't have any bruises because perhaps there's more emotional abuse, or they get hit in places where you're not going to be able to see, like in the head.
Right.
On the head, people get hit and it causes traumatic brain injury. So that's one of the biggest things is that I'm not going to be believed, and that somehow it is my fault. And we know, that gaslighting does that when they turn that situation and make it seem like it's your fault.
Right, and when they make you think that it's all you and you caused it. And
yes.
So when someone suspects a loved one is in danger, what is the safest place or the safest way to help them? I mean, should we go and talk to them in person or make a phone call? What is the safest way to be able to seek help for that?
I think that if you have an opportunity to talk to somebody and just say to them, you don't deserve that. I've noticed this or I've noticed that, and you do not deserve that. It is not your fault.
Right.
I think when you tell somebody that it's not their fault and that you believe them, that changes, because you have somebody who is constantly telling them that nobody's going to believe them, or that somehow, they've caused this, or that they've been doing this, that, and the other to try to change themselves because they think that that's going to make a difference, in the relationship. So being non-judgmental and then referring them to the Houston Area Women's Center or an organization that's going to be able to help them get the help that they deserve.
Right. So Sonia, we're near the end of our close, and what is the one message you want everyone watching to remember? Please tell our viewing audience of Viva Magazine Live, what is it that you want to leave them with tonight? That
domestic violence is a public health issue, that it impacts us all, that there's no one in our community that is not impacted by it, and that it is something that is predictable, it is something that is preventable, and if you are a survivor of domestic abuse, it is not your fault. We believe you, and help is available, and we want to be able to support the adult and the children as well.
Yes. All right, there you have it. Thank you, Sonia Corrales, for your leadership and for the life-saving work that you do. God bless you and your organization for everything that you do. So if you or someone you know needs help, you are not alone. You can contact the Houston Area Women's Center or call the National Domestic Violence Hotline at 1-800-799-7233, or call the Houston Area Women's Center at what number, Sonia?
713-528-2121.
All right. Thank you very much for joining us on Viva Magazine Live. I'm your host, Blanca Blanco. Please take care of one another. And if you see something, say something. Hasta luego, Houston.